The trip to Moscow actually started with a planned trip down the eastern seaboard of the United States. That trip, a fortnight before I was actually due to go, the organisers on the other side completely let me down. So therefore I'd got to think of something to do with actually travelling on a long distance trip. And in one way or another it eventually came to the motorcycle trip to Moscow. I read in the motorcycle press that the Federation of International Motorcyclists were going to Moscow in 1967, but I had a very short period in which to get all my papers cleared, because Russia, East Germany, Poland was all very difficult to get in and out of. But I managed to get everything sorted, and I convinced John Williams to go. And although on the very day that I went, and I said to my wife, I'm still not sure whether Williams will go. I did go to his house and I did convince him. We had to go to Birmingham and get all his papers sorted out. But after a very hot, long, sticky day, we actually managed to get down for the midnight ferry to Harwich. We got down to Harwich and had a clear run across to the Hook of Holland on the night ferry. As soon as it was daylight, we were off the boat, and as you can see, the archaic way in which they were slinging the bikes off, which took for ages to get off. Williams had got a 1939 Triumph twin motorcycle, and my bike was a 1930 Sunbeam, which my son still keeps. In fine weather, we got off the boat at the Hook of Holland. As you can see, they craned us off in a very archaic way, but we soon got going and was making very good time through Utrecht, up through Arnhem, eventually into Germany before midday. Then we went on even past Hanover, where we planned to stay, and kept going until we come to Hemstadt, which was at that time on the east-west German border. So we decided to call it a day then, and got up nice and fresh for the next morning for the next part of the journey. We got going from Hemstadt through the borders into East Germany, which is extremely wooded, and to go round the Berlin Ring, all we saw was forest, and we never saw a glimpse of the city at all. It didn't take us long, 4 hours travelling time to cross the whole of East Germany up to the river Oder and Frankfurt and Oder. We stopped for a little while and the police, East German police, came and said, we can't stop, you have to move on, you're not allowed stops at all, except at petrol stations, and then there was always someone there to monitor you. So we eventually crossed out of East Germany, again very early in the day, maybe by midday we left, and then we were on the road to Poznan, which was an organised stop for us, where we had booked an hotel in the Orbis, which you can see, a big standard modern hotel. Weather standing up extremely good for us. Although we had noticed from leaving England there was rumbling of thunder in the background and threatening us all the while. But up to that point we hadn't been caught out by weather, and everything was absolutely first class, running on time. Everything was very, very nice. Poznan was a pretty modern city, nothing really to say much about it. We stayed overnight in the hotel, and again, as our normal procedure was starting to become, getting going as early as possible, because there was no lights on my motorcycle, and the lights on Williams's motorcycle didn't work at all. And we had some fiascos as we went, but that is later in the story. We moved on that day and found ourselves in Warsaw. We were booked in the only hotel there, called the Bristol, and as you will see, there was large tracts of derelict land from when Warsaw had been flattened 20 years earlier during the war. Everyone was friendly. One word that we knew was universal was beer, so we could ask for a beer. And then we learned that ice cream was called loddy. So for about 3 days we lived on beer and loddy because we couldn't ask for anything else. It was pretty good. Warsaw itself, there was a building there called the Wedding Cake, or nicknamed the Wedding Cake by the Poles, and it was built by the Russians when Poland had to become communist after the Second World War. And it looked like a wedding cake, as you can see. Warsaw, fine. We got up early again in the next day, but at this point we made a mistake, and it took us 24 hours to realise we'd made a mistake in our direction. When we left Warsaw, the weather was extremely good, and we made a wrong decision because there are two European roads that cross each other. One is the one that goes from the Oak of Holland to Moscow, which I think is the E12, and the E8, which is from Minsk in the north of Russia down to Gibraltar in Spain. But these two roads use the same bed for a distance of 100 miles or so. So on that Sunday, as we were travelling thinking that we were in the right direction going east, we were actually going north towards Murmansk. It took us 24 hours to even see that we'd made the wrong decision. But it was a lovely Sunday, and we went into Bialystok, and as you'll see, we were drinking at the roadside after we were just about to book in the hotel across the road. And I recall I bought a round of beer for everyone, and it cost me less than 40 pence for the whole lot. And someone who could speak English there was talking to the other Polish people, and he turned to me and he said, "My friends want to know if you are a millionaire." When we came to leave Bialystok on the Monday morning, we realised our mistake, and our point of entry on our visas said Brest. So rather than cut across country, we decided to double back towards Warsaw and then find a road that cut down to the road that led us to Brest and eventually on to Minsk. At that particular time, when I was 31, it was the hardest ride that I'd had in a single day or 2 days. There was a lot of talk in the press at the time, that, or the motorcycle press, that who was the last people on the road at that time, because all the cyclists were starting to get together and getting into a line of getting into Russia. So there was by that time we were picking up other motorcyclists, and there was a lot of who was last on the road. I consider we were the last on the road because I had no lights, as I've already said, and John's lights didn't work. We rode through twilight for maybe 2 hours, and I was surprised. And because I'd actually got into Russia, I was prepared to throw the bike in a ditch and get my way home saying, well, at least I got to Russia. But the bike never faltered. All the way there and all the way back, it went very, very well. And then we worked our way up into Minsk, and we arrived there about 5 o'clock in the morning, and we'd made about another hour of daylight in the morning. We got into the hotel, never went to bed, just lay on the bed with our clothes on, up for breakfast 6 o'clock. And as you can see, by that time in Minsk, things were happening, people were about the town, and we were lining up then. There was teams getting together then, and we noticed that the English teams, which were made up of the Motorcycle Federation of some sort, I don't even know what the name of their club was, but they looked with great disdain at our old vintage bikes, because they were on modern BMWs or BSAs of the time, with suspension and lights and everything. And I think they felt that we might be stealing a little bit of their limelight. But we went on from Minsk after that day that we had the longest day. We went on to Smolensk. Leaving Minsk, we got on the road. Very nice weather, still absolutely fine. Roads very, very flat. Concreted roads, but no traffic on the roads. Everything was fine, everything was smooth. We had a very good run up to Smolensk. Smolensk was a city that I couldn't compare with Moscow because I hadn't been there. But I did notice that the churches in Smolensk, as you'll see, the cupolas were not gold-leafed, where you see later that in Moscow the churches were all gold-leafed and painted lovely, whereas Smolensk had that little feeling of just a little bit worn, as you can see. But I thought it was a lovely city. The wall of the city, and it's called the Kremlin, Kremlin is castle, and I thought there was only one Kremlin. So when they were talking about the Kremlin, I thought they was talking about the Kremlin. But okay, they had their own Kremlin, and the church, as you can see, the Cathedral of Consumption, I think it's called. John used to call his bike the Cathedral of Consumption, on about how much oil it was taking to keep it on the road. But I thought of all the places I went, I thought Smolensk was the one that I took to. As you can see, the trams on the bridge would shake. Everything was fine about Smolensk. If you read the history of Napoleon and his army, they had difficulties with that river crossing, coming and going, and the Germans was even just as I pushed a very big river there, which I believe is called the Dnieper. But Smolensk, absolutely fine. John and I got up very early on the morning that we were leaving Smolensk to see if we could get going, because we were much slower obviously than most of the bikes on the road. So we worked our way up to Moscow and probably arrived again around about midday. The distance would probably be about 200 miles, and we'd shifted that off in maybe 6 or 7 hours, so you can see we were not very fast. When we actually got to the edge of the forest, at the point where you look down into Moscow, which was very spectacular, the Russian police were lining up groups of people to move them in columns, and the Dutch were lined up in front of us. I presume because they were there and we hadn't seen them on the road, that they had probably camped in the forest and were now lining up to go into Moscow before anyone else. We were expecting at any time to see the British contingent coming up behind us faster, but they never arrived. And so we latched ourselves onto the end of the Dutch people, pretending to be Dutch, which was great laughter from the Dutch. And we moved with the Dutch and went in to our accommodation in Moscow with them. Over the years, John and I had talked about it and the fact that no motorcyclists had been allowed in before, since the revolution in 1918, and because there was a war before that, there is a slim chance that no one had been to Moscow by motorcycle before from England. So we consider it's a possibility that we were the first Brits to ever ride a motorcycle into Moscow. The other people from the touring clubs of Britain who were actually on that trip would no doubt want to contest that, but if they do see this disc, well, let's see what they say about it. Moscow was fine. The people were very, very nice to us. Everything was absolutely first class. If you look at the picture of the Russian in the lorry, you'll see it. If you look closely, I got on very, very well with him. He was a real nice chap. And then also we've got other things going on when we went to ballet and to, well, not me, but we went to the door of the Bolshoi ballet, and then we started to have our 3-day stay in Moscow. The trip up until now, we'd had very good accommodation in hotels, and we were expecting the same sort of treatment when we got to Moscow. But we were very kindly shown a tent, which you can see behind in the picture, that John and I managed to get our clothes off for a change and get smartened up to go downtown. The other picture you'll see is of a motorcycle in disarray. What had happened, it was one of the Scottish contingents named Murphy, 2 brothers, and the bike had seized its back piston. He managed to get a message to London and a piston flown out. He put the piston in and he got going nicely, and he got to the end of Gorky Park where we had been camping, and it blew up again. He managed to get a lift off someone else going back, and he got home. And I did hear on the grapevine that it took 3 years to get the bike back from Russia, and it looked like someone had gone over it with a sledgehammer, and there was dents, paint missing, and he was in a dreadful state. But that was probably a very sad thing for the chap who had made that great big effort, because we went out on the town looking at sightseeing and everything that they were Russians organised for us, while he, the poor chap, was stuck there doing his bike. As I had said before, my motorcycle had cost me £35, and the camera that I had taken, with the pictures you can see, general pictures of Moscow, I don't need to explain those to you. The camera was a Leica, and I had to insure it because I'd borrowed it for £300. The camera was worth 10 times more than my bike was worth at that time. And so I took the pictures, and I've done slideshows with them to various people over the years. The Russians couldn't make head nor tail of us to start with, because when they met John, and John looks more like a Russian than a Russian, they all thought we had bowler hats and pinstripe suits and were about 5'2". Even when we went on the Metro Underground, and you'll see the underground pictures as you see the pictures of Moscow, a woman was going on to John about something, and all he could say was no in Russian, which is "niet." So at the end of every sentence she was going on about, which we had no idea what she was talking about, he'd say "niet," and then she'd start again, and then he'd go "niet," and it went on, and I was really in laughter, and the woman was looking at me like I'd gone mad. But I thought it was quite a nice joke with John. We went all around with people. They took us to meals and took us, well, in block we went everywhere, and we were all looked after. But over the years I've read quite a lot about Moscow and the people and Russia itself, whose people I do genuinely like. The things I read about was Napoleon and Hitler, for instance. Napoleon drew all his armies from all over Europe. There were Spanish, Italians, of course French, Norwegians, every type of nationality went to Moscow, except the Brits. And there was 750,000 people actually went, but there was only 16,000 that got back. They had gone there with pure greed. They had ransacked Moscow and they'd stole the gold and the silver and everything. But it was all lost on the way back because they had to cross icy rivers that would give way and they would lose the gold. And then the horses would starve and the horses would fall down dead. It must have been a terrible plight for them. The Germans had one advantage, that at least they just went as men. Napoleon's soldiers took their wives and children with them. And to see your wife and your child starving must have been heartbreaking beyond belief. I think when we got to Moscow, we went to the tram depot and we got on the tram and we went into the city. I know that Hitler's lads had got actually as far as the tram depot, but I think perhaps because there was no one there and they couldn't get a ticket, they wouldn't go on the tram without a ticket. And well, that about sums up the Germans, isn't it? We spent 3 days in Moscow in all, and as I said earlier, that they treated us very well, but then it was time to go home. Mission accomplished. There were instances on the way back, but there's no point in really going back detail by detail because the way that we came home was the same way as we'd gone. But some instances on the road I thought maybe you'd like to hear about. For instance, we didn't run into bad weather until we come back, and just between Minsk and Smolensk on the way back, it rained like rain I've never seen. It was sheets of water coming down. It wasn't raindrops, and it really saturated everything. We had nowhere to shelter, we just had to bear it. John eventually came off his bike and broke his footrest off. And we travelled on for some time, and then shoes were starting to burn on the exhaust system, and we thought we'd better see if we could pull in and weld it. There are lots of sort of farm implement places, as you would well imagine, in Russia, and we pulled into a farm implements yard where there was tractors and things being repaired. And John said to the guy that was running the show, we presume he was the guy running the show, said, could you weld it for us? And the bloke kept shaking his head, and John said weld, and he still shook his head. Then he tried to think of other words that he would understand that meant the same thing, like vulcanise, glue, stick, nail, anything he could do to get the guy to understand what he wanted. But to me it was pretty obvious and I could see what was coming, but John couldn't. So when he finished all his gesticulating, maybe 2 or 3 minutes, the guy turned to John and said, no, I'm sorry, we can't weld it. He said, but we can amputate your leg if you like. At which he then took the bike away and welded the footrest. John was looking a bit miffed. You look at pictures of John, poor John, he's gone now, but you look, he never smiled all the way there and all the way back. He just worried. And so we made our way back, and as we come back to England, the weather went fine again, and it was extremely flat. There was only one hill, that's where we lived, around Sedgley area, and I remember when I started I changed my gearing so that the bike wouldn't rev so hard or so high. And then when we come down the hill and we went flat, as it does in Nottingham Way and all through East Anglia, very flat. Holland, very flat. Germany, just as flat. And right up through Poland, right through the central plains of Poland and right up to Moscow, we never saw the slightest hill, nothing at all. And when I eventually looked on the map, I saw that the next hill between the beacons where we live, along on the Sedgley, Dudley, Wolverhampton Ridge there, the next hills are called the Ural Mountains, which are 1,000 miles beyond Moscow. So the journey was very, very flat, very straight, very tedious in sometimes, just sitting in the saddle. I wore out my breeches, and then I wore out some pyjamas which I was wearing underneath my breeches, and eventually everything I'd got, underpants and everything, I wore them out because there was no suspension on the bike, and it just had to sit there and vibrate. It was. I wish I was as fit as I was then, because I was only 31. Sometimes my son will get the bike out now and we'll take it down the road for a run, but I've only got to do half a mile and I'm absolutely worn out. But we still have the bike and everything runs well, and I hope my son will keep it and it'll be in the family. We've had it now for 50 years and we're only the second owner, so it's something we keep clean. John, unfortunately, which I was not very happy with, sold his bike the next week when he came back for £40. And John was a bit money mad, to be honest. And but if he'd have said to me, Jim, I've been offered 40 for this bike, if he'd have said that to me, I'd have immediately give him 50. And £50, you know, not a lot of money today. But in those days, even when I went, you were only allowed to take £50 out of the country. So I had to put money in the handlebars. That was fine, unless somebody stole the bike, and that would be it. But okay, it came in handy. The currencies, rubles was Russian, zlotys in Poland. East Germany had the Deutschmark, obviously. And so we had no problems. I dealt in dollars mainly. So when I used to exchange my money on the black market, I'd get 10 times the value. But any of the money from the East German, Polish, Russian, it was no good to you when you came back because you couldn't put it in the bank. It was like finished, that was it. So I remember coming at the border point and giving a kid something like 1,000 zlotys, which I think would be about, 20 quid. But I gave it to this kid, he just looked at it, grabbed it and ran like hell. I just laughed at him as he went. So, did somebody some good, I suppose. So, all in all, I think, yeah, I reflect on it sometimes, but not too much. I've still got my bikes, I still ride, I still want to ride. Great little hobby.